You'll need some self-raising flour, some butter straight from the fridge, some mushrooms, I usually use 5 to 6, 4 carrots, I use organic carrots so I don't have to peel them, 4 peppers, a large red onion, a third of a garlic bulb, a tin of tomatoes, tomato puree, some paprika, preferably sweet paprika, thyme, rosemary, salt and pepper. And some Quorn chicken chunks. The chicken chunks are best because they don't have a strong flavour. We're going to start off with the dumplings. So for the dumplings, you'll need 2 bowls. Fill one with your flour and the other with a little bit of flour. Now the butter needs to be cold from the fridge, and what we do is we grate the butter into the flour, into the large bowl of flour. So you'll need to work out the quantities yourself of how much butter and flour you want to use. But what we'll be ending up with is like a crumble, the same sort of consistency of an apple crumble. So once we've grated the butter into the flour, we mix the butter with the flour by pinching the butter into the flour until we get a crumble-like texture. Once you've got the texture we want, we're going to add some water to the flour to make it into dough. I usually use a spoon to begin with because this part can be quite messy, and it's much less messy if you stir in the first bit of water with a spoon. Just add enough water until it's reasonably moist. And then when you're happy with the texture being a bit moist, you'll need to start using your fingers to make the dough. It's a bit like making pizza dough really. Just mix the flour and the water into the right consistency. Don't be afraid to get messy at this point. And you can always add a little bit more water if the dough is not quite moist enough. And if the dough is a little bit too moist, just add a bit of flour to it. The reason we use self-raising flour is because the dumplings are going to need to raise when they're on top of the goulash. So, when you're happy with the consistency of it, you can break the flour into as many dumplings as you like. I typically break the flour into 4 dumplings. And what you do is shape the dumplings and then coat them in the flour in the bowl, just on the outside. So put the dumplings to one side, and we're going to start now chopping the veg. So we're going to start with the garlic and the onion. A little trick with the garlic: if you place the garlic cloves into boiling water for a couple of minutes, it makes them much easier to peel. So I've got some boiling water, some water that I've boiled in a glass, and I'm just putting the cloves into there. Leave them a couple of minutes and then it will make them a lot easier to peel. So we then chop the onion, and don't chop the onion too finely. What you'll be seeing with this recipe is that we chop everything fairly thick because we want to have crunchy vegetables. We want to be able to taste the vegetables. So chop the onions very thick. And we don't, once we've peeled the garlic, we don't actually chop the garlic at all. We leave it as it is. The reason we do this is we want the garlic to dissolve into the goulash. So we use extra virgin olive oil for frying the vegetables. And as you can see, I've prepared the peppers as well. Chop those into fairly big chunks too. We start with frying the onions and the garlic, and then after a minute or two we add the thyme and the rosemary into the garlic and onions. Don't cook them too hot, but let them sweat. We just want the onions and the garlic to become slightly more transparent. Once that's happened, we add the peppers, all the peppers too. So mix the peppers in with the thyme and rosemary, the garlic and the onions. Cover this up and let it cook on a medium heat while we cut up the rest of the vegetables. So the carrots. I like to cut carrots very thick, and what I do is I cut them in irregular patterns. What this means is that they're nice and crunchy and they're large. As you'll see, I'm cutting at different angles each time I cut the carrot. I've found carrots taste so much better if you cut them like this. So here we can see how chunky the carrots are. Leave them nice and large chunky carrots. We also cut up the mushrooms. Those need to be fairly chunky as well. I slice those, but I leave them quite chunky too. So we put all of this in together with the other vegetables that we've already prepared. But before we do this, we add the paprika. Now I like to use sweet paprika rather than smoked paprika. And be very generous with the paprika. I use 3 to 4 spoons of paprika. And when I say spoons, I mean dessert spoons of paprika. So we stir that all in. Add some salt and some pepper. You may decide you don't want to add any salt, but it's very good to add the pepper. Again, be generous with the pepper. And let this for about 5 minutes simmer, or maybe less than 5 minutes, just so the flavours are all in there. Then we add all of the rest of the vegetables, the mushrooms and the carrots. We add the tomatoes. And we add some water. We need the water to come up to about halfway in the pan because the dumplings are going to be absorbing this water, all of the liquid for us. Stir this up. You may need to use a larger pan than I've used. Then we add the corn. As I mentioned earlier, I like to use chicken corn rather than the beef corn because the beef corn has a very strong flavour. The chicken corn is less flavoured and it tends to absorb the flavours much better from the stew, from the goulash. And finally we add our dumplings on top. If you just squash them down a little bit on top of the vegetables. And these are going to cook. It's self-raising flour, so they will rise as they get hot and they're cooked by the steam and the liquid within the goulash. Leave this to simmer on a low heat for 45 minutes. After 45 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to take the dumplings out of the goulash, carefully spoon them out into a dish. And you'll see they're nice and firm, they're nice and cooked there, and absorbed all the juices from within the goulash. So we put these aside for a minute. And we add some tomato puree just to thicken up the sauce. Use as little or as much as you want. I tend to be quite generous with it because I like the flavour of the tomato puree, so I add quite a lot. And just stir that into the goulash. And you'll need to remove the thyme and the rosemary stalks, or warn your guests that there's thyme and rosemary stalks in the food so they don't eat it. Serve the goulash with the dumpling on top. And you can add some parsley, some fresh parsley on as well, just as a garnish, and it tastes very good as well with the parsley. And if you really want to indulge, you can add some fresh soured cream.